Hello everybody and welcome to NLP Metaprograms episode 16, Relationship Filter. Going out live on a Friday night here in London. That's because last night I was speaking at the Yes Group in Norwich. At the time would have been going out live. So what we did was we pushed it back just one day. It's interesting, I put these live videos out on a number of different social media platforms. Obviously we go out live on Facebook. Then also the recording is on my YouTube channel. I put it out on LinkedIn, share it with the NLP groups over there, and also share it in the NLP group on Reddit. And you get some interesting questions that people raise. You would think there'd be questions about, NLP metaprograms or, how could we use strategies, which is some of the questions I was getting this week in the Facebook Live, David Shepard's Facebook Live group. But on Reddit, I got this question, why do you always wear black? Is it because you're wanting to impersonate Tony Robbins? So my response was, I'm just not tall enough to impersonate Tony Robbins. And I like black. I was wearing black before I even knew about NLP. So these idiosyncrasies that people pick up and think there's got to be some deep, dark meaning to various things. So let's crack on with relationship filter for metaprograms. This is a very useful metaprogram in the context of business, particularly in recruitment for particular roles within an organization, but also then positioning people into particular roles within a team. As we've mentioned several times with the metaprograms, if we put someone in a role which requires them to do activities that don't naturally fit, don't naturally blend with their metaprogram profile, then they're going to find that those activities, that situation, those circumstances challenging or difficult, which means they're not going to enjoy the job. They're not going to find it easy, and therefore they're not going to perform at their best. So we can look at metaprograms in two ways. One is we can look at, okay, what would be the ideal metaprogram profile for someone to do this particular task, this particular activity within an organization, with a team, and recruit someone or find someone within the organization that had that metaprogram profile. Though it is also possible, and I'll probably do an extra episode at the end of this series, because it is possible to work with people to assist them in changing their metaprograms. This is a very exciting thing. In the personality matrix on my NLP training app, we actually talk about the basis of personality being our values, our beliefs, and our metaprograms. And these are kind of dynamic. They're in flux. They can and they do change. And we can also change them with quite conscious volition. So therefore, once we understand how to do that, we can assist someone in changing the basis of their personality by assisting them in changing their values, changing their beliefs, or changing their metaprograms. And let's talk about that right at the end after we've done all the metaprograms that we're going to cover. So this one, relationship filter, this is whether the person perceives their reality as everything being the same, whether the first thing they notice is the similarities between things and then the exceptions, whether they're experiencing things as being, noticing the similarities and the differences balanced equally, whether they notice the differences first and then they notice a few exceptions to the differences, or whether the person is total difference. My favorite question for eliciting this, and we can do it really kind of like off the cuff, very naturally. Take a piece of paper or a flip chart, draw 3 boxes on that piece of paper or on that flip chart, and then we ask the person, again, the language here in the question is very important. We ask the person, what's the relationship between those 3 boxes? What's the relationship between those 3 boxes? Then we're listening for, what do they notice first? Do they notice the similarities first? Or do they notice the differences first? So if they're saying, well, they're all rectangles, they're all drawn in black, and they all have 4 sides, then they're noticing the similarities first. If they were to go, well, that one's on its end and these are on their side, then they're noticing differences first. So that's the first thing we're going for. What do they notice first? Do they notice similarities? Or do they notice differences? Which gives us an idea as to what category we're going to put them in here. Then, do they notice, is it all sameness with no exceptions? Yeah? Or is it all differences with no exceptions, no similarities? That would be these 2 extremes here. Or then we're going for, what do they notice first? And then what's the number of samenesses, similarities, and the number of differences weighting? Which will give us an idea, if they notice the samenesses first, and there's more samenesses than differences, then there'll be sameness with exception. If they notice differences first, and then they notice some similarities, but there were more differences than similarities, then they're difference with exception. If they come out with an equal number, an equal weighting of sameness and differences, as in the number of similarities and number of differences they notice, then they will be sameness with difference. So a couple of things here as far as what this will tell us about the way the person experiences things. Actually, let me give you one other question, because you can do this with the 3 boxes. That's the one that I prefer. Another question that you can ask is, what's the relationship? That's the important word in the question. What's the relationship between what you were doing this year in your job and what you were doing last year in your job? And again, what we're doing is we're listening for the same distinctions. Now, from a behavioral point of view, this has a big weighting on job longevity. Somebody who is more sameness will tend to stay in the same job for longer. So, for instance, somebody who's total sameness will tend to stay in the same job for maybe 15 years or more. Somebody who's total difference will tend to stay in the same job for 18 months or less. And then we've got a sliding scale here. Sameness with exception, kind of like 7 years or more in the same job. Sameness with difference, maybe 5 to 7 years. Difference with exception, maybe 18 months to 3 years to 4 years. Which gives us an idea how long somebody would stay in a job. But also, here's some other things too. People who sort totally by sameness find change stressful. So if the organization's going through a lot of change, a lot of culture change, people who sort more by sameness will find that difficult to cope with because they like things to be the same. Whereas somebody with more difference demands change. If there isn't a lot of change going on, they'll be bored and will leave. If you've got an organization, you've got somebody here who sorts by difference and you want to keep them, and you want to keep them in their job, but there's not a lot of organizational change going on, then we can provide difference for them, for instance, by changing their work environment, changing where they sit, changing their desk layouts, etc. That can work. Yeah, so there's some interesting things there. Now, also from a behavioral point of view, somebody who's total difference will tend to pick difference with everything that everybody else says. You'll say it's a nice day, they'll go, well, it's not that nice. You'll say, oh, the weather's a bit bad today, it's all right. They'll tend to pick difference, which some people who sort my sameness might think that they're being grumpy or just being difficult. Now, how can we harness this? Because that, in certain situations, is useful. So let's say we're in a team meeting, we're discussing new ideas. A person who sorts more by difference is going to tear down every single new idea by saying this is why it won't work. Which means that the people who sort more by sameness will tend to go, oh, there's no point in me saying anything because they just disagree with me or tear everything down. So what we can do as a leader of that team, we can say to the person who sorts my difference, you have a really phenomenal skill to see or to discover the things that won't work in any idea. So what I'd really appreciate you doing is once we've honed down on a particular idea, that's the one that we're thinking we're going to go for, is it okay with you that I move then over to you and you share with the group exactly what you see as being the problems with that particular idea? It's a way of harnessing this. Other places where more difference is useful would be in quality control. If you've got somebody who's looking at the quality of a product or the quality of a service, you want them to evaluate every single item of that product, every single delivery of that service as different, rather than going, well, they're all boxes, they're fine. Yeah. So again, quality control, somebody who sorts high by difference, really useful. Somebody who sorts more by sameness, not so useful. So again, it's finding the metaprogram fit for the particular role within the organization. We also talked last week about the relationship between this particular metaprogram, the relationship metaprogram, and the chunk size operator. So as you'll remember from episode 15, somebody who sorts by sameness will tend to be more global from a chunk size filter. Because when you're global, everything becomes the same. Somebody who sorts totally by difference will tend to be more detailed and more specific in the chunk size filter or the chunk size operator, because the difference is in the detail. Yeah? So those are relationships between the two. I'm going to share with you, just in closing, an example of the power of these metaprograms in business consulting. I was brought into an organization, consulting into an organization, met with the then managing director or CEO and the marketing director or CMO. And they were facing a particular problem within the organization, which baffled them, and they wanted to see if I could assist them in diagnosing the problem and also assist them in resolving it. They said it was a serious problem. It wasn't that they were going to go bust or anything, but it could leave them open to a hostile takeover. It was a high street retailer. And so I said, so what's the problem? And they said, well, we've got a major staff retention problem in our buying department. That's the department within the organization that buys all of the product that they're going to put out onto the shop floor. So we've got a major staff retention problem. We spend a lot of money recruiting people. We then spend a lot of money training them up. And by the time we actually get them into their role, into their job as a buyer, they resign and go off to another organization. We're having a problem keeping people for longer than a year to 18 months. From what I've already said, you've probably started to get an idea here. Then they said the other thing that we wanted to bring in is a concept called integrated product lines. Now in retail, you've got two things. One is footfall, the number of people that walk through the door. And then the other thing is average customer spend. Integrated product lines is a concept to increase average customer spend. So when a customer comes in and they've gone in to buy one item, let's say item X, They're looking around the store, they find item X, but then they also see related items Y and Z, so that they leave with X, Y, and Z, potentially spending 3 times more money than they'd intended with just going in and getting item X. So we've been introducing this to our buying team, our buying department, and they're simply just not getting it. They just do not understand the concept at all. The marketing director or CMO then asked me, David, have you been into one of our stores recently? And I said, well, I did. When I know I got the meeting with you, I thought what I'd do is I'd go in and go into the store and see what my experience was. And he said, what was your experience? And I said, well, total chaos. In fact, I couldn't find anything. If I'd gone in to get item X, I couldn't find item X, let alone X, Y, and Z. Head in his hands is exactly what we're talking about. What do we do? Now, you've probably already worked out staff retention, 12 to 18 months. This would be a symptom of that particular Metaprogram profile. Integrated product lines require sameness with exception Metaprogram profile, because what we want to do is we've got item X, okay, what's the same as X and different? Yeah, do you get that? Just sameness with exception. So I asked the question, I said, who recruits all the people in your buying department? And the answer was the chief buyer. And I said, is he or she available just for a couple of minutes? And it was a she, and they said, let's give her a call, we'll see. And she was available. So she came in, and we're in a meeting room. There was a flip chart in there, and this lady came in, the chief buyer, and I drew that on the flip chart. And I said to her, what's the relationship between these 3 boxes? Her immediate response was, do you mean how are they different? I said, what's the relationship between these 3 boxes? She said immediately, do you mean how are they different? So I know straight away that she has a difference relationship Metaprogram profile. Paradoxically, somebody who sorts completely by difference likes to hang out with people that are the same as them. So completely unconsciously, what this lady had been doing is recruiting other people that sorted by difference. Hence, they couldn't get the notion of integrated product lines, and also they were leaving the organization within 12 to 18 months. So I knew this just from asking that one question and what I understand about Metaprograms. So I said, thank you very much. Thanks for your help. She left looking rather confused. Plus the CEO and the CMO are looking a little bit confused too. And I explained this. And they then said, so what do we do about that? I said, well, you need to move your current chief buyer out of that role. Either make her redundant or put her into a role where her Metaprogram profile would be more suitable. Or if she was open to it, I could work with her around changing that Metaprogram. As I say, we'll talk about how you do that later on in the series. But obviously, she's got to be open to having to working on changing that. I said, you don't need to worry about the rest of your buyers in the buying department because they're already looking for new jobs anyway. What you need to do is then to find somebody to put in as the chief buyer who sorts more by sameness with exception. They are naturally going to understand the concept of integrated product lines, and they're going to stay in the same job for probably at least 7 years or more. How do we do that? I said, that's what you hired me for. I've diagnosed your presenting problem. You hire me to actually recruit the person and to show you how to make this whole thing work. So that's just with one question. Once you understand Metaprograms, as a business consultant, it really gives you some deep insights into diagnosing from a people point of view what is the root cause of the problem that's causing the symptoms they're experiencing, and also a strategy to actually change that so the organization can get what they want. So there we go. That's our Metaprogram for this week. Hope that was useful. If you've got any questions, then please share them underneath the video, and I'll be happy to answer any of the questions that you want. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next week. We should next week be back again on Thursday, 1900 hours BST, because we're on British summertime here in the UK now, which would be 1800 UTC. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week.